Hello everybody, this is Dave at the Ultimate Mixdown. Welcome back for the first video in our Mixing from Start to Finish series. In this video, we're going to talk about the static mix. And what is the static mix? Essentially, it's using your volume faders and panning knobs so that you can get the mix of all of your instruments to sit roughly 80 to 90% of the way there. The idea isn't that everything's going to sound perfect, especially if you're going between different sections of the song, but we want to use this crucial step so that we have a good solid mix that we can build as a foundation for when we start reaching for plugins like EQs, compressors, and so forth. Now, it doesn't matter what DAW you're using, it doesn't matter what style of music you're making. The tips in this video will help you mix your session regardless. And with that said, let's dive right in. So here I have a session for my song If Not For Love. This is for my project Drevel. I'll put a link in the description below. And I've taken the stems from the recording sessions and I imported them in here, and then I organized them, I color-coded them, I grouped them together, making sure that everything is nice, neat, and organized so that I can flip back and forth between different instruments or different sections and not get lost in the mix. So at the top we have our lead vocals, then our vocal doubles and our backing vocals. Then we have all of our guitars. We have our bass guitar. And then we have our drums, and these were all exported from Easy Drummer. And the first thing I like to do is take the volume of all the instruments down to negative infinity so that we have a clean slate to work on. And then we can slowly bring each instrument or each part of each instrument slowly into the mix, adjusting the volume, adjusting panning so things sit just right. Okay, so let's head over to the mix window. And here I'm going to select all the tracks. So Command A in this case, or Control A on a PC. And then you can click the volume fader of one of the tracks and drag them all down to negative infinity. Now with this, we shouldn't be able to hear anything when we hit the play button. Now there's multiple approaches that you can take for starting off a mix. Oftentimes it's a great idea to start with a focal point like a lead vocal or a kick drum and dance music. What this allows is you can set the bass level for that important instrument, and then you can work on setting the levels of all the instruments around that one key focal point. Other cases, people like to mix from the top down. The instruments with the higher frequencies get mixed first, and then you bring in the low frequencies. And then the alternative is true as well, so some people like to mix from the bottom up. This is a relatively heavy rock song, and I like to start with a solid foundation in the bass and sub-bass sections, and then work my way up. So I'll build in the drums, I'll build in the bass guitar. Once I get a good groove and rhythm for that, I'll bring in the electric guitars, and then lastly, I'll bring in the vocals. So in the track control panel and in the mix window, the red tracks are my drum tracks. And I've organized this from bottom up too. So I've got kick, snare, toms, hi-hat, overheads, and then we work up to the effects that came out of Easy Drummer as well. So I have ambience, compression, distortion, and reverb. So here, going left to right, our drums will be over on the right. So I'm going to start playing the song from a point that has the majority of the instruments in it. Oftentimes it's a good idea to do it in one of the louder sections of the song. I'm going to keep my eye on the meter over here. I don't want to reach much above negative 6 dB on the meter. You want to have some headroom later in the mix. You can always bring your individual instruments down. If you're not able to hear them in the mix, but you have your levels set to an appropriate level where it's hitting around negative 6 dB on the master, then just make sure you turn up your volume knob on your audio interface. So with that said, I'm going to press play, I'm going to dial in my drums, and just listen for what I'm doing here. I'm going to bringing up levels, I'm going to be panning certain things left and right. Oftentimes this is to create space, and it's to bring in the illusion that the drums are more three-dimensional than just one drum track that comes down the center in a mono channel. Alright, so follow along with me as I bring in the drums. Here we go. Yeah, that's sounding pretty good. Now, a few things to point out at this point. So we brought in our ambience, compression, distortion, and verb. And what we really needed to do here was pull in those faders up loud enough so that we could hear the effect that it had on the drums, and then dial it back so that it sits nicely in the mix. In particular with the drum verb, we can use this here for a little bit of glue, so you're not going to hear it too much in the mix, but then we'll add a separate reverb to the snare later on when we work on our effects. Now the last piece to bring in is the toms, so let's go to our edit or arrange window and find a section where the toms are playing, like right here. And we can loop this section, and while we're looping it, we'll bring in the toms. Okay, and then Easy Drummer has the ability to export separate toms to separate channels depending on the drum kit that you're using. In this case, it was all the toms on one channel, which isn't ideal. What I like to do is leave the low frequency instruments in the center of the mix. This is a very typical thing to do. If I had multiple toms, I might pan the high tom on the left a little bit left, the high tom on the right center, and then the floor tom on the right. This is a relatively good submix for the drums. It's sitting relatively well with enough headroom so that we can continue mixing in the other instruments. And in a worst case scenario, I can bring down this fader here, or I can bring down the instruments individually so that we can continue mixing and not go above our threshold on the master track. So now that we have the drum set, let's bring in the bass. So for distorted guitar, it's relatively dynamic, so we'll use a little bit of compression later on to tame that. Now that we have our sub bass, our bass, and some of our mid frequencies set, now we can start working on the higher mids and the high frequencies. So I want to finish off the instrumentals by bringing in the guitars. And what I'll do here is I'll start with the rhythm guitar, then I'll layer the leads on top, and then we can finally come back and bring in some of the vocals. So let's find a section in the song where the rhythm guitars are prominent. Just start right in the beginning. Now, one thing to point out with the rhythm guitars is it was quad tracked, meaning that we have 4 tracks, and the idea is to pan 2 left and 2 right. These are all recorded separate tracks, so we're not doubling any tracks, otherwise that would just make things a little bit louder. But what we want to do is we want to have a nice, wide, full effect. And if we start running into issues with it clashing with the vocals, then we can dial back. So let's start bringing them in. Listen to how panning those wide just made everything sound more open and less muddy than it did when I brought them right into the center channel. All right, let's continue. Let's bring in the other 2. Again, the vocals are going to be closer to the center, so we don't want to clash too much with the vocals. We already have these guitars panned hard left and hard right to bring in the effect of the guitars and the sound of the guitars without muddying up the mix, so we want to make sure we keep it that way. And then as we bring in the guitars, we might need to bring all the guitars back down because it's getting too loud with 4 tracks. So let's go ahead and continue. Let's start bringing in the leads. Okay, and these two leads are only at the end for an added effect in the final chorus. And because the other leads that I just brought in are kind of closer to the center, I'm going to make these leads panned wide to give a very wide stereo image to the lead guitars. Let's go ahead and bring these in. In this case, because we have so many guitars going on at once, it starts to get a little bit muddy when we bring in all of them. But the idea here is to get a very good, decent balance with volume and panning, and then we can go ahead and EQ to carve out the remaining pieces to make it sound polished. So now that we brought in all the instruments, let's go ahead and bring in the vocals. Because the vocals are the most important piece of this song, we want to make sure that our leads are right down the center, that they're louder than the instruments. We can hear all of the parts together, and it might look like there are a lot of vocal tracks, but certain vocals only play in a specific part of the song. So what I want to start with are the lead vocals, which are right here. I'll bring in the leads for the verse, and then I'll start bringing in doubles for the verse. And then I'll bring in the chorus leads, and then I'll start bringing in some of the backing vocals for the chorus as well. All right, and I'll start playing it, and I'll start dialing in the vocals.
Faces blue, march on loaded guns, nowhere to hide for those who run. One fight to claim it all, one strike to break them all in two. We won't cohabitate. Dying breed of fake, we scream until our face is blue. March on loaded guns, nowhere to hide for those who run.
So starting to like the sound of bringing those leads just a little bit out from the center since I have two leads. What I could do is I could use one as a primary lead down center and I could use the other one a little bit quieter behind it. But I kind of like the stereo effect of having them panned a little bit left and right. And oftentimes you'll hear this where the vocals are getting pushed a little bit farther out. It makes them sound a little bit bigger. It makes it have a chorusy effect. I do have a bass version of my vocals, so what I did was I sung the chorus an octave lower. I'll keep that in the center channel. I like to keep my low frequencies in the center. That'll also keep space with the leads. And then I also have this grungy chorus, and that kind of brings a little bit of grit. So I'm going to bring these up, I'm going to bring these in, and then I'll start working on the width. So these are the vocal backing tracks, and these two right here for the chorus, I'm going to pan much farther than I did for the leads, and that'll bring a nice width to this. So let's go ahead and loop this and bring them all in.
If not for love, where would we be? Blinded by hate for those who see. If not for love, where would we be? Blinded by hate for those who see. Clinging on to hope, drowning in pain, everything to lose, but nothing to gain. If not for love, who would we be? If not for love, where would we be? Blinded by hate for those who see. Clinging on to hope, drowning in pain, everything to lose, but nothing to gain. If not for love, where would we be?
While these vocals have a good mix with themselves, I want them to mix a little better with the rest of the song before we move forward. So keep in mind with this performance, there's a good dynamic range that we'll need to tame with compression. We're going to add some harmonic content with saturation and distortion plugins. And then we're also going to EQ as well because it's very heavy on the mid-range. I want a little more presence on the upper end. I want to cut out all of the low frequencies that we don't need and then make sure that everything sounds nice. I would take a few listens through from beginning to end. You don't want to overdo it, and honestly, after a certain amount of time, your ears start to get fatigued, and then you start changing knobs and faders, and you're actually doing more harm than good. So now that we have our static mix down, doing all of this got us about 80% of the way there. Doesn't sound like a full polished mix yet. Ideally, you want to have everything sounding exceptionally well at the recording level, and then even better with the static mix, so that when you're grabbing plugins, you're just doing minor cuts or minor additions. Ultimately, you can add on some effects. So with that said, stick around for the next video. We're going to get into EQ. That's a big one as well because that's going to start creating space across all of these instruments. It's going to help us accentuate the parts that we like about all of our instruments and dial back some of the harsh frequencies that we don't want to hear as we progress through the mix. As always, thanks for joining the Ultimate Mixdown. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, share it with your friends, hit the like button, and be sure to subscribe for the next video in the series, Mixing Start to Finish.
If not